falls around the Great Deception.
Yeah, bingo. And LA and I talked about that. I said, LA, is this the Great Deception? And he didn't hesitate. He said, absolutely.
I never used to question before, and now I question everything.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion.
And welcome to the Great Deception Podcast. I'm your host, Matt. Thanks for joining me. Tonight, we have a little roundtable discussion. I got together with Chud X from the World as It Is Today podcast, and he does that with his wife, Lanny, who also does the Greener Postures, which I highly recommend to go check out on YouTube and the podcast itself, as well as our buddy, Matthew Smith, who always is a pleasure to talk to. He's just full of knowledge. I don't know how he does it, but he's always got new information. And it was just a fun conversation. And we really got together originally just kind of chat. And they're both from Washington, so they wanted to square up a little bit on their history of Washington in the area. And we talked about the underground in multiple cities. We talked about fires in multiple cities, like Bellingham, Seattle, Portland, Spokane, Ellensburg, all this, all these things that we keep seeing. Then we started looking at some of the architecture, which is always fun. And some regrade projects, which is always another interesting level to these resets in these cities, is regrade or leveling projects, as they call them. And then we took a little turn and went into some holographic universe, electric universe stuff, which is really a fun topic to talk about. And you'll see where we go from there. We get into some ayahuasca and some frequency and vibration discussions, and then just life in general. What is freedom? What's true freedom? And we get into that and then we wrap up with a little space and dinosaurs discussion and trying to understand that psyop and why it's pushed so heavily on our children. So I don't know, guys. I really don't. But before we get going, I wanted to thank, guys, I ask not for much, and I've been asking and I've been receiving lately. So thank you very much. We got 3 new reviews. We got a 6-star, really a 5-star rating, 6-star heading. Great pod. Thank you, Nomad. I appreciate it, brother. Fantastic show. Matt does a great job. Love his research into the murky waters of our discarded past. Insightful and informative. Also highly entertaining. Keep digging. The Real AI. Thank you. Much appreciated. This is an interesting show. The host has a great voice, and so far every topic has been very interesting. Take a chance and give the show a listen. You won't be disappointed. JJ Pasadena, much appreciated. Thank you so much. All you guys, I appreciate it. On Apple, if you can leave a review with, whatever, preferably 5 stars, it helps the show greatly. Same thing on Spotify. All it takes is 2 seconds. Click that button, give it a review. Now, I want to thank our newest patrons. That's the other thing, guys. I want to push the Patreon. Not so much. I'm trying to not build a community, but get people. My whole thing here is to connect people. And I feel like my job right now is just to connect certain people and get people connected and energies flowing together. And that's what this podcast and what Patreon has done. I've been able to connect a lot of good people that aren't necessarily on social media. And this is a great way to communicate. We have, I share as many old books as possible. We're going to get into at least one a week going forward. And these books are from I try to be from the 1800s mainly. Some will be from the early 1900s or sooner. I have books from, like the 13th century on that I will be sharing, as well as photos and stuff along with these topics. But the big thing, we have a Zoom patron call every month. It's a couple hours, one Friday every month. Great time, great people, great discussion. So if you want to hop in, Great Deception Podcast at patreon.com. So patreon.com/The Great Deception Podcast. And I want to thank our two newest patrons. I want to thank the Mexican Polo and Peter. Guys, thank you. I look forward to speaking with you. And hopefully you guys can hop on the next Zoom call, which will be probably, if it's not St. Patty's Day, it'll be the week after. I'm trying to work at it. My son's birthday is coming up this month here in March, and I got to work around that. He's my number one priority in this game. So with that said, let's move on and get you off to a really fun conversation I had with Chud and Matthew. So guys, I really hope you enjoy this, and let me know what you think. Again, leave a review, share the show. Enjoy. So how we been, guys?
Been pretty good, man. Life is always hectic, especially when you have kids and you've got I work in the Matrix as well as at home. And that, of course, always sucks. I like to think of it as 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And that foot in can feel like it's pulling me a little too hard sometimes. But no, the real life, the life that I really lead, is going great.
That's awesome. Yeah, one of the things I learned, I heard the other day that really stuck with me was that, like, listen, you can be in the Matrix and use it to your advantage also, right? It doesn't all have to be, dark and evil. Like if you can put out like what you and Lanny are doing with the podcast and with the YouTube channel, that's positive. That's you taking their instrument and using it for the greater good. And that's, that's a good thing. And I think we need more people that do that, because there's too many brainless creators these days.
Absolutely. It's funny, taking their tools, they're taking Zoom, for instance, in 2020, before I ever podcast at all my own self, you would have heard me talk shit on Zoom. I would have said, oh, this whole pandemic bullshit couldn't have happened without Zoom. This is Zoom's fault because they're keeping the kids home from school. They wouldn't have done this without Zoom. I hated it. And then I started using it and I was like, oh, you know what? I can use this for good. It doesn't have to be the evil that I immediately saw it as back then.
Yeah, all technology is like a hammer at the end of the day. You can build something beautiful and you could hit somebody over the head with it.
Exactly. Every tool can be used for beautiful things, but every tool can also be a weapon.
That said, they rolled out these laptops in the schools, and yeah, you mentioned that you had kids. And by the way, Chud, it's really nice to meet you finally.
Likewise, man. I've been loving your podcast, your YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Is some great stuff, especially being in Washington. I'm up here in Northwest Washington in the corner near Bellingham. And I've always wanted to do the underground tour in Seattle. I think I'm going to be doing that in the next couple of weeks with my son. Because I watching your video on that was the first time I've talked to so many people from that area who grew up there, who were forced to go through that tour as a school field trip or whatever, something like that. And I would ask them, well, what's it like? Is the city up on stilts? Cause I was under the false impression that the city had burned down and then they rebuilt above it. And I just couldn't quite grasp it. But finally your video was now I can see with the retaining walls coming up. I mean, yeah, I still have a lot of questions. Yeah, but it was the first time that it actually made some level of sense.
Yeah, Seattle history is a riddle and an enigma and a mystery. And it took a couple months for me really looking at it and going through a couple of dozen books to really end the tour and just walking around downtown to really kind of tease it apart. And even now it's just like, do I have this straight? Because they cut, sections down, they filled in the tidal flats, they built the city burned down, they built the city again in record time, like the World Fairs, And then they knocked a lot of that stuff down and, rolled out these modernist type, contraptions. And
exactly. And that's what I want to get into tonight is Seattle is, as you just described, it's a mystery. It's an enigma. You can't quite hammer it down and understand its true history. And I'm up here in Bellingham, like I said, and I am looking in my own backyard. And as I've become more awake to these things, I've realized that Bellingham is just like Seattle in its own slightly smaller way. And in one of your videos, you started talking about Port Townsend as well, or maybe that was when you were here with Matt. And that made me, I've been to Port Townsend a number of times. I'm going, yeah. And there's other small towns that I've been to that the more I'm starting to come to this conclusion that if anybody digs into their own local history, they're going to find the same kind of stuff, no matter where you are.
I was just up in Port Townsend over the weekend and went around with a buddy of mine taking pictures of, old world buildings. And Port Townsend has an underground. Port Angeles has an underground, and you go down, Portland, of course, has an underground. It's very strange. And they each have like a little bit of a different backstory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And Bellingham's is no exception. It's completely different than what I've heard for any place else. The first inkling of underground Bellingham came to me. I'm born and raised here. I'm fifth generation living here. And my dad used to work construction, and we were at a park where we could see the Bellingham Museum, which is a former city hall. So it's a unique building. And he was talking about it, and I was pretty young, and he was saying, yeah, I actually worked in that basement doing construction. And one of the guys was working with a jackhammer on the floor. That's the building. And he was working on the floor with a jackhammer, and just poof, the jackhammer disappeared. It fell through the floor. And he himself didn't go down, but someone went down to go retrieve it, and they came up and they went, guys, you got to see this. And one by one, several people went down, and it was an empty void that just continued on. It seemed to go in one direction towards the city as far as you could see. And he was like, yeah, it was, I guess we're built up just like Seattle is, and it was like, oh, okay. And I was just a kid, just kind of put that in the back pocket of my brain.
Interesting.
And I was like, wow, that's crazy. And then a few years later, I was living in downtown Bellingham in a little studio apartment across from a triangular building. Looks a lot like the Occidental Hotel shape, not architecture wise, but just that triangular shape, which there's a handful of them in Bellingham because why? I don't know. They decided to shift the direction of the roads and they made these little triangular spots, and they built perfectly fitting buildings into those. Mm-hmm. I lived across the street from one, and I would look down at it, and there were glass panels in the sidewalk along the outside of this triangular shaped building. And at night, those were lit up. And I started going, what's that all about? And that was the building. Yeah, that one right there. I lived in the apartments that you can see on the other side there, the short building, probably like the third or fourth set of windows down. And by weird happenstance, I was at a wedding, and I was talking to a guy. He was also from Bellingham, and I was asking him what he did. I can't remember what he did, but he was retired, and he owned this building, and now all he did was maintenance on it. And I said, oh, what's up with those? Are those skylights in the sidewalk? And he went, oh, yeah. The basement of this building that we're looking at right here goes all the way out across the road. And he said, I'm pretty sure, because there's welded off doors down there, they would go into the basement of the building you live in. And I was going, what? That doesn't make a lick of sense to me, like the interconnected basements. And then over time, I was in a few other basements. There was like a nightclub that I was in, bands and stuff. And we'd stay up late after the bar closed, and we go down to the basement and smoke weed and drink beers and stuff. And that thing was like a labyrinth on its own. I I was going, I bet this continues out. I think we're not under the building anymore. And, all that kind of stuff. So this is all just back pocket. This is before I was awake to any of the stuff that you and Matt talk about. But it was always just real fascinating to me. And I would tell it to people and they would say, well, do you know about Fairhaven? Fairhaven's it's actually part of the same city now, but it's the next city south. And there's a plaque there that is dedicated to the Asian workers that got sealed off in underground Fairhaven and were killed because they didn't want to pay them. And I'm like, what the fuck?
That's dark.
And Fairhaven itself has much older, much bigger. Yeah.
Mayor apologizes to Chinese community. That's the worst apology ever.
In 2011 for something that happened in 1903. It took
108 years to say you're sorry, and you kind of said you're sorry like half-assed.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we put this stone in.
It's not even a sentence. Mayor apologizes to Chinese community. It's like
doesn't
a headline.
even say which mayor.
Yeah,
it doesn't say shit. That doesn't. This
look
is
at the thing. Chinese deadline. No Chinese allowed beyond this point for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like what? This is.
It's just it gets so far out so quick with and this is just a no. I mean, this is a small town. It doesn't. It's like 100,000 people. It's
right.
Like we're inconsequential to U.S. history for the most part. There was a small war fought here in like 1855 or so, defining the Canadian border. It was like the last section. It was called the Pig War. No one died in it. It was, but it was a very small, but that's about it that Bellingham has had on U.S. history.
Is that what war is like with Canadians? Like nobody dies?
Yeah, nobody dies. It's called the Pig War. I can't remember why it was called that, but it had something to do with someone's pigs crossing over the border where it is the border now. But they said they owned all the property, and they said, okay, we gotta finish this. And they ended up constructing in Bellingham, Fort Bellingham, to fight, I guess, Canada. Or, I'm not sure what territories these would have been called at the time. I haven't looked into the Pig War for a long time. But all of this led me to now more recently, I started going, okay, I gotta know what's up with underground Bellingham. It's okay to talk about it, but it's not known by anyone at the same time. So I started looking at this. There was a picture published about 6 months ago in a small local publication that said, it was a section called "What's the deal with?" ? And it was a picture of a car that had fallen through the floor of a downtown mechanic shop in the 1950s. And it said that this was easily explainable because of the Seaholm mines, which Bellingham was built on top of. And I was like, oh, okay, Seaholm mines. How did I get this far down this, living here my whole life, that I never heard about these mines? And I start looking into these mines. And these mines existed from like 1855 to 1890 at best. There are no maps, and no one knows where they are, because they were being controlled by a business, a coal mining business out of San Francisco. And guess what happened to all the records?
They burned up in a fire.
They burned up in the Great Fire.
It sounds like throughout America, there were like these Jurassic gophers that were just tunneling underneath, and then all of a sudden, we just claim it. Mm-hmm. But every city, or you're hearing about it in New York City, you're hearing about it in the Midwest. You go to Chicago, Kansas City, you go out west, you go from California all the way up the coast, Oregon, Washington. Mm-hmm. There's tunnels everywhere, underground, and it's like every area has a slightly different twist to it, and it's it's almost kind of like, their interpretation of the flood story. Every culture has their own little spin to it. They call it by different names, but in the end, it's all around the same time frame, and everybody has their own little twist to it.
So yeah, well, what we keep bumping up against is the realization that this realm, like this land, is so much older, has been occupied and built upon for so much longer than any of the history books would indicate. And then you have the high weirdness with the fires, which, I didn't know Ellensburg, Washington was such an important place, but they were vying to be the capital alongside Seattle and Spokane and a couple others. And then all three of them burned down within 2 months. The downtowns burned down within 2 months. And then at the same time that there's a state convention going on for statehood, or it wasn't a state convention, it was a territorial convention, for statehood. And then a couple months after, these, business districts get torched along with, all of the old infrastructure, all of their records, who and what. And then sure enough, Washington joins the Union, and they just start over, just knock down what was there and lay out a new infrastructure. And
then they choose Olympia as the state capital. Which I just drove through there within the last week, and I didn't get off the freeway, but I could see the Capitol building, and I'm going, "Oh, look at that! Would you look at that? It's
beautiful." I took.
It really is.
Yeah,
it's having been in the tunnels, Matthew. How old do you think they are? Just feel, and by your eye seeing them, what kind of vibe did you get out of them?
I mean, the Seattle tunnels, I mean, it feels like they're 100 years old, or it feels like they were, built when they said they were. And, there's modern looking, photographs. I mean, modern being like 1910s, 19-teens of them elevating the highways. And then, and then the sidewalks were connected to the new roadways later. So that checks out to me. But then I go into something like the Rosendale Mines, and we talked about that before, in the Catskills. And that's supposed to have been mined out like throughout the 1800s. But I go in there and there's like 25, 30 foot ceilings, and they go on for acres. Mm-hmm. And I mean, when I was in there, the feel of that was ancient. It didn't feel like it was chipped out by, some, just primitive tools. And, even like a newly, they said that they had newly, invented a hydraulic hammer for that mine. And of course, that's where the natural cement, the American rock cement comes from, that all these old buildings used for their mortar, in which, just to kind of flush that out, that, is like an equivalency to the Roman cement. Like, it hardens underwater. It gets more durable as time goes on. It's self-healing,
and it's flexible almost too, mm-hmm. right? Like within being harder, it also has give, mm-hmm. which is Roman cement is on its own. I mean, it's its own research project on right there.
Yeah,
and compared to the materials they're using today, which are only meant to last like 50 years.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that can't be ignored. Whether we're talking about Bellingham or Seattle or New York City, or even, let's look at the Great Pyramids, the pyramids in Giza. We have the Great Pyramid, supposed to be the oldest one. It's also the biggest and most magnificent one. And mm-hmm. then they made and then if we go by their timeline, then they made a few more, but it's like each time it's not quite as good as what it used to be. And you zoom all the way up to now, it's like I'm living in a house that was built by my great-grandfather in 1916. And this thing is a tank compared to anything that's made today. I mean, this is a very well-built home. They don't build homes like that around here. I don't think anywhere. We dealt with some flooding about a year and a half ago nearby here. And the big problem is that all the houses were so cheaply made, they just disintegrated when they were hit with too much water. This thing, it wouldn't bode well being hit by that much water, but I don't think it would disintegrate the way, something that was built just like 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And within that too, something that I note is we have all these like regulations, like you can and you can't build in different places. Why would Bellingham be built? Why would we choose to build all these tall buildings on top of mine shafts when there's plenty of space, I have to assume, where there aren't mine shafts? And yet today, if I wanted to build something out in the middle of nowhere, I feel like I'd be, if I'm getting permits and stuff, they'd give me a hard time. They'd say, we don't know about soil erosion. We haven't studied the land out here in the middle of nowhere well enough to decide whether or not you can build a single dwelling on it, let alone we'll just put up a whole city right on top of mines, like.
Well, maybe Matt's right. Maybe it was Jurassic gophers that did it.
That's what I'm starting. It's like, why not at this point? There must have been some period where there was these huge animals. No, but it makes you wonder though, why? And it goes back to kind of what we were talking about before with some of these, you see it more in the cathedral type buildings, more of the sacred buildings. They just build on top of each other. It's just layer upon layer. They'll put their own touch on what was before, but there's something about that land. There's some energetic value to that land that requires them to build on top of it. And I think that's the same with some of these big cities. What I call them kind of the reset cities. You have wherever they had a World's Fair for the most part is one of those cities.
Yeah.
So to my point, I got this picture here. You can hardly find this thing on the internet.
That thing's massive.
Look at this. This was Bellingham's second city hall. Okay.
That looks just like it's not the city hall, but in Port Townsend. It's the county building, I think.
The date on that was 1890. Then that one that you had some pictures up there, Matt, was the one that replaced it.
Well, yeah.
This is that building. And what year is that? 1892.
Mm-hmm.
So they built that first one I showed you. And 2 years later, they decided to build. I mean, it's a cool looking building, but when you're right up there with
check this one out.
Look at that.
This is from Missouri. This is what our friend Jeremiah sent me. So, I mean, that looks eerily similar to the one we were just looking at on yours.
Yeah. It's and something interesting about this one that I just showed you here is you pretty much can't find that picture on the internet or any pictures of this thing. I can find some like small ones that I can blow up and it's all pixelated and stuff. It wasn't until I picked up this really shitty book. It's got great photos, but it's a horrible book. Called
that's the way most of the narrative books are, but what you can get out of it are the photos, right? There's the evidence.
Right.
And then you can go and look at other sources, because that's what I've done with a lot of these books. I'll just scoop them up for the pictures. Mm-hmm. So I have that proof right there.
Well, and and to why this book sucks, like what it says underneath that picture is that it was bought by this guy with the last name Peterson, who decided to dismantle the building. Okay. That's all it's got. But I've dug at that really hard. And what I found is the guy actually lived in Alaska and he bought that building, the old city hall of Bellingham, Washington, and moved it brick by brick up to Alaska as riverbank reinforcement rocks. What? Why?
Yeah.
That's
silly. It's just a silly story.
It makes as much sense as the beaches that they made out of the World's Fair buildings. That was one of the stories, was that they took all the old concrete and plaster and they threw it and made beaches. I know they did it in Chicago, and I believe they also did it in San Francisco. And you can go out there and find pieces of concrete on the beach that are old remnants of the World Fair.
Just to also put things in perspective for how small Bellingham is, right here is the first courthouse. So they built that.
That's what you would expect to see, right?
Yes,
you wouldn't expect to see these lavish buildings with towers and spires on them. You would expect to see these cookie cutter boxes. Yeah.
And there's like a whole story about how they bought the bricks from San Francisco and they were brought in on a barge and it was the first brick building in the area and blah, blah, blah. But one thing that makes it interesting, you can hardly see in this big picture here, but there's a little circle right there. That's where this building is today. Now, if you can see, this is water. This is out. It's up against the water, but now it's right here, way inland, as this is all backfill, just like Seattle. Bellingham filled in all the tide lands out there, and it just makes you go, why? Why would so few people go to such extreme efforts? And there's nothing about how they did it; they just did it. It's at least with Seattle, you know, they can say things like the Denny Regrade project and all the sawdust from Yesler's mill, and you know, like they say something. Here it's just, no, we just filled it in. That's it.
Right.
And we're just supposed to accept that. And that building, that one is still standing today too. And I can see from these pictures, those doors stick up about that far above ground. About it's like a 1 foot space. It looks like a little window, but it's actually the two doors that are on that old photo. And you can't tell that. You wouldn't ever know that from driving by or even getting out and looking at it, because there's a little plaque saying first brick building in this county or something to that effect.
So did they say that was done after the regrade?
Well, they don't say there was a regrade here.
Oh, that's interesting.
Seattle's got that. They can say, well, we did this regrade and that filled in the flatlands there. But here they just say we just did it. It's not.
Yeah, because when you were saying that they made, you know, how that building was surrounded by water, now it's inland. I was wondering if there were some, you know, other areas of town that also got leveled, so to speak.
Yeah, you would think so, but not that I can see.
Yeah,
not from any of the drawings or photographs that I've seen. Which there's a handful of drawings of the general landscape, you know, like from up high, from a vantage point that I don't think would have existed unless they were flying in something back then.
Hey, Chud, maybe
which I'm pretty open to.
Maybe I'll come up there to Bellingham and we can poke around town together.
Oh, dude, I would love to.
Yeah,
like that's I love showing people around, especially in the last few years as I've gotten wise to a lot of this stuff. I can usually make people scratch their head pretty good, but someone like you would actually contribute to the conversation and think about it, as opposed to most people. I get them just going,
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. It's well, you know, you've got to be open to that everything's been, I want to say a lie. Really, it is a lie, but at least we've been misinformed. You know, what are we looking at here?
So this says this is the 4th AV Regrade from October of 1907, supposedly in Bellingham.
I've never seen this picture.
Wow. So they had a regrade project too.
So that makes sense. If you know, I should start looking with the word regrade, because I've never been able to in books like this, because there's just not a ton online. There's not a lot of stuff, and there's like a historical society here, but I don't want anything to do with them.
The other thing to dig into, Chud, is the state archives. Try to find the Washington State Archives, and because you'll find a lot of great old articles, papers, things like that in there that you won't get anywhere else.
There's a Washington State Historical Society building that when I saw it, it was like, holy cow, it's just like a beautiful, like kind of Greco-Roman building right next to Stadium High School in Tacoma.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been wanting to go in there.
Tacoma's interesting too, man.
Oh, Tacoma's, yeah. High strangeness in Tacoma. Stadium High is just mind-bending.
Tacoma's older than Seattle, am I right?
Yeah, well, it developed faster first in terms of like the railroad arrived at Tacoma and then stopped, and then Seattle kind of went bust for a few years. Like, so they had the railroad show up, the Transcontinental Railroad show up earlier.
Is this Bellingham again here, Matt?
It says,
I think that's Seattle. That's Bellingham.
I think this looks more like Seattle, doesn't it, Matthew?
It does. Yeah, that looks familiar.
Let's see. This is from.
That's definitely Seattle.
Yes, that's 30.
Oh, that's Bell Street.
Yep. Well, that's not the same picture, but yeah, let's see. These are all Seattle.
That's probably the Bell Street that got it confused in there.
And I took a tour of Stadium High School in Tacoma, and there was a local tour guide, and we couldn't get in because it was during the whole lockdowns. But I looked at it pretty closely on the outside, and first of all, it's like 12 stories, built into a hillside, and then the tour guide told us there's underground tunnels there that the high school kids used to like be able to get into, and then they cemented them over. But there's things like, the story that he shared with us was they got all these bricks they were ballast weights from like merchant ships that came from China. So they would come here, they would unload their cargo, and then they would toss these ballast weights that were these bricks, but they're beautiful. They're exquisite. They're sort of narrow profile, high strength. They're like those old Roman bricks. And I'm looking at the arches around the windows, and the bricks in the arches around the windows were trapezoidal shaped. And I'm like, that's not like throwaway bricks. That's like super high quality.
Look, hey Matt, bring that last one you had up again if you can easily.
Which one?
The very last one you had there it was a Denny Regrade picture. Because I just saw it on John Levy's channel. And he was pointing out, I'd seen that picture a bunch of times. I bet it was in there. Yeah. And he pointed out something I just hadn't seen before on there.
John Levy picked up on the Seattle thing.
Yeah, I think he's getting into it. It's not this one. It was the one with here we go. This one right here. So we've got on the right side of my screen, we've got that mound right there, right? With the flat top. Yeah. Look just to the right of that at the height and squareness of that building back there.
Well, that picture might be from like 1914 or so. Like these regrades went on for decades.
Yeah.
And it has no windows though.
He actually said this was the oldest picture of Seattle, now that I remember. And now that's not even close to true. No.
John said that.
I'm pretty sure, and I don't want to misquote him, but that's what I thought I heard him say.
Yeah, he was also noting it looked like a gallows or something down there, but I think that's part of the hydro mining or hydro. What's the name of the process that they're using?
Yeah, hydraulic mining.
Yeah, hydraulic mining. I got into that on a podcast once, talking with Jared Murphy, author of It's Not Aliens, Worse It's Us. It's a book re-examining human history.
Yeah,
basically like a fuck you to ancient aliens people and saying, no, this is ancient humans that did all these things. But he was talking about it in probably around the same time, around the turn of the century there in the Grand Canyon, and that they were doing a ton of hydro mining down there at that time. And that there's still like huge mountains of pilings from left over from the mining that they would do. And he was just asking the question, how was this thing built, or made? Was it carved by a river running through the same place forever, or was it like stuff that we were doing as recently as 100 and
the Grand Canyon, just the Grand Canyon in general?
The Grand Canyon in general.
That's when we start getting into electric universe theory.
Oh yeah. Oh man, I'm so open to that being some kind of electrical burn.
It's a Lichtenberg plasma discharge carving out, it's pretty kind of what it said in the Bible. Valleys are carved out, and mountains are cast down, and you get into the old mythologies of like Thor and Indra having a thunderbolt, and and I just love it. And speaking of Thunderbolts, that's the organization, the outfit that really got me into electric universe theory. And their chief physicist, Walt Thornhill, who like rearranged my thinking on pretty much everything, he just passed away. So that was a big surprise. And just take a moment to give homage to his legacy, because he was really able to explain the physics behind, how everything is pretty much electrical. And by everything, I mean, existence, our reality is electrical, and he explained so many things, like how that run contrary to modern physics, how, for instance, this, stars and the sun in particular they're not powered from within, like, nuclear furnace, but they're actually powered from without, at what they call pinch points of these Birkeland currents that, go through space, these electromagnetic filaments, basically plasma.
Yeah,
filaments.
Plasma.
Yeah.
It's like the idea that space it's not empty space, but like a plasma that can carry currents and things like that. Am I right?
Well, what it does is, what this theory implies is that the ether is real, and that the ether has electromagnetic properties. And I'm a lay person when it comes to this, and I kind of get myself into trouble trying to explain, the electrical engineering of it. But say plasma it's 98% of matter is plasma. The matter, the realm that we experience with liquid, solid, and gas is a small percentage of all the matter out there. Everything, I mean, life is pretty much plasma based. Yeah,
and it's also electrically based as well. Like you get into like, how does the brain work? And it's electronic impulses.
So what you just showed there is pretty much how the Grand Canyon was carved, if you look at it through the lens of the electrical universe theory, because plasma phenomena is scalable.
Yep.
Fully scalable. So whatever happens in the micro scale also happens on the macro.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that giant ball that sits above our head? It's plasma, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it makes sense. And when you start looking at this thing, like you just said, Matthew, at the macro and microscopic level, because what we see throughout the realm are repeating patterns, whether it's the sacred geometrical, like we got into with Dave and Brandon, we were talking about the all of the different models that use the same, it boils down to the same thing. It's all going back to just sacred geometry, Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, things like that. And it all branches out from there. But you see it at both levels. You see it on the larger level, and then also at the microscopic level.
It's as above, so below. As small, so big.
Yep.
It's fractal in that sense too. I think it keeps getting bigger, but it also keeps getting smaller. And I think it's kind of the same thing on all the levels.
What do you guys think of the, speaking of fractal and sacred geometry and ether, what do you guys think of this idea of the holographic universe, that basically, our realm is, that we exist in a holographic universe? What are your thoughts on that?
I love it, but I don't know much about it. I'm very open-minded. I have no answers. I'm a questions machine. The deeper I go, the more questions I have on everything. I haven't dived in particularly on holographic universe, but the little bits that I've heard, I'm all ears.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of it, Matthew?
I'm with you guys, I'm with you, Chud, at least. I think it's anything right now that makes me think, and gets me outside of that box. And whether I agree with it or not is beside the point. It's, can you rationalize? And what I like to do now is try and look at both sides of it. How can I prove it true? And how can I say, oh, this is bullshit? And then it's probably somewhere right in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Matthew?
I mean, it definitely jives with my experience, like, and I specifically
now, for people that don't have any understanding of it, can you kind of give like a 30-second high level?
Not sure. I mean, it's, it kind of gets back to the idea of, well, we've sort of already touched upon it, that everything is fractal, the ether is real, and we exist within this sort of primordial soup of electromagnetism, and it takes on various forms, plasma being the most common. I started to say that it comports with my experience, and specifically what I'm talking about now is, working with entheogens and plant medicines. And, Matt, I've shared with you that I've been working with ayahuasca for about the past 5 years. And, a lot of folks have, done different things, mushrooms and whatnot. But I feel like when you're having those experiences, and this, the sort of, the reducing valve of your brain being a receiver, kind of, most of our waking life blocks out, most of what's out there. So we're only taking in kind of what we need to survive and perceive our immediate reality. But then, these substances open up that reducing valve and allow us to experience a much broader, bandwidth. And I think I feel like that's what we're interfacing with. We're experiencing that sort of holographic nature.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I often come back to different types of simulation theory type things, but I don't like the idea of, I don't think that we're in a computer. I think that's too easy.
Mm-hmm.
I think comparing life to a video game it's just way too obvious in 2023. And I don't think that's really what's going on, but I don't know, things that I've entertained a lot throughout my life, things like collective consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I've looked at, I've always been curious about consciousness. And with that, like, I've gotten into the idea that our brains aren't creating the electrical pulses, like I mentioned earlier, but instead that they're a receiver and that we're getting this from somewhere else. And, I've entertained a lot of these like really far out ideas that don't necessarily make a lot of sense in the firm, hard, fixed reality with which we're presented today. The world as it is described to us.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't think that's where our consciousness lies. I'm open to ideas like that we're living in a realm that is that's consisting at the same time in the same place as many other realms. And that's where like ghosts, demons, angels, Bigfoot, all these things that some people see and other people don't. They could all be right here. And holographic universe as a whole is one of the many ways that I can entertain these ideas with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And again, having done ayahuasca almost 60 times, I've seen things, and those things to me now are as real as my waking life. And I don't always experience them in my waking life, but I've experienced them enough time. And then you get validation, where you'll have two people, or I'll have, they call them the curandero, the person in the shaman's seat, and they're singing Icaros, and it's all about cleansing. This is kind of what makes ayahuasca a little distinct as a plant medicine modality. It's a lot about cleaning your energy. And so you're working with a practitioner who's singing Icaros to you, and that the energy, and it's kind of like the organ in the cathedral, where that song is moving energy, and it's working with the energy of the plant, of the ayahuasca, and it's and whatever is sort of dissonant in your energy field within your body, or your energy body, the idea is that it's vibrating that out of you. And what you'll end up doing, what's common is that you'll purge. You're kind of, it's very alchemical. It's like where your liver is turning this negative energy into a fluid that you can then release from your body. And
that makes sense.
And
it does.
And that gets along the lines, Matthew, of, kind of you attract the energy that you give off. Mm-hmm. And, depending if you're in a low state, you're going to attract that low, dark energy. If you're in a better state of mind, if you're, so to speak, vibing higher, mm-hmm. you're going to attract that higher vibrational frequency back. And, I'll speak firsthand to it because, there were times where I was in a bad place and attracting negative people that just added to it. And then there's been other times where I've been putting out, different vibes and attracting those sort of people. So there is definitely, I think everything boils down to vibration, frequency and vibration.
If everyone you meet in the course of a day is an asshole, there's a really good chance it's you that's the asshole.
Right? There's one common factor. Yeah, it's so true though. That's the other part. We have to look in the mirror too. And be realistic with ourselves, because I think, especially in today's day and age, it's easy to get crazy real fast.
Oh yeah.
And get into these things that, do they really mean anything in the end? Because what matters is what's around you, what you can touch, what affects and impacts your family, your livelihood, because a lot of it's just nonsense and distraction. And granted, there's nothing more enjoyable to me right now than going and researching old buildings and stuff. But in the end of the day, is it going to solve anything? I'm not going to cure hunger or solve homelessness or anything. But again, it's better than sitting there and watching, mindless television. That's for sure.
Right. That's like, like I was saying earlier too, with the 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the matrix, the things that really matter to me are my homestead, my family, my podcasting, and I'd love to say research, but I don't do that much research these days. But it will be again at some point in my life. But it's so easy to let those vibrations get distorted when I'm out there doing the things I don't want to be doing. And if I spend too much time out there, my vibration, my attitude, my everything starts becoming lopsided. And then it's harder to step back out of that and then get into my real life, my real job, my real family, my real existence. And sometimes those things bleed over and it's not great. It's great when it goes the other way. Sometimes things are so great here that even though the world's falling apart outside of me, that just doesn't affect me.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important what you're doing and focusing on your homestead and your family. And, that's these last 5 years have just been a complete 180 for me. And that's when I started working with ayahuasca and so forth. I spent I've told Matt this, I spent 20 years, considering myself a leftist, and I was pretty hard left, man. And then, I lived in Newark, New Jersey for quite a few years. And, I worked with the inner city community. We did all sorts of police brutality work, and and we had all sorts of city council campaigns. And the mayor of Newark, Raz Baraka, I bring him up because it's like important reference point for me now, because he's the product of multiple generations of and a long legacy of civil rights activism. And, he rose out of that to represent really this, generational push towards civil rights and self-determination and all this stuff. And so he gets into office and started doing some really good things. And, and then the system throws, this fear grenade, and then he's at everybody. And then he's like the hardest nose in terms of locking everybody down and, taking the basketball hoops out of the the public park so the kids would stay inside their their little box apartment and for 2 years and put masks on, social distance. And it's like, this is what I signed up for. No, man, that's the fear programming. And so it all these last few years have made a lot of things clear for me that really the hard work, to have that sort of positive effect rippling out really does start with yourself, man. It really is. So, I mean, how I treat my kids, how I respond to my wife, just the little things in life, like, how do you, treat somebody at the grocery store? Just these mundane interactions that we have can make or break somebody's day.
Yeah.
And especially kids are suffering so much right now, and they're walking around with so much grief and depression and like suicidal thoughts and like this. And just by, maybe a kind word to somebody can just completely change their life.
Absolutely. Being kind to the world around you is, it has such a positive impact. I felt that a lot in 2020 when everything was being locked down and people were wearing masks everywhere. And I didn't ever go along with that program. And I would go to the store and I'd have to psych myself up before going in, because I was going to have to go past someone who was going to ask me to put on a mask. And I would have to, just to have this little song and dance that I'd go through to get in without having to do it. And it could easily have put me in a bad space. It did put me in a bad space, but I'd have to pull my mind together. And when I would see someone who needed help getting something off a shelf, as a short old lady, I'd happily grab it and smile and hand it to them. And I would see such a response from these people who aren't seeing faces at this time. They're not seeing, I'm the only face in the store. And if I'm in there and I'm the only face in the store and I'm angry, because I probably am angry deep down inside at the fact that everybody's wearing masks, that's not going to help anything. But when they'd see me, they'd forget for just a half a second, Oh yeah. Smiling faces. I forgot about those. And then they'd probably get scared and run the other way because they'd be afraid they're going to die.
Programming kicks back in, but they had that moment.
And same thing with every single clerk or checker that I'd speak to. I would always, I'd have to say, I'm having a great day. How are you? Because it was just so important to me to keep that up during that time, because those vibrations from everyone, and including myself, unfortunately, were just so low that it took some, personal conscious work to keep those high. And I would absolutely feel the effect of that right away.
Well, and I think that was intentional, right? That whole operation was to lower everyone's vibration, to get everyone in a state of fear, because then you're much more easily manipulable. You're malleable when you're in a state of fear. You're looking for help, and they, they were enforcing obedience, and which goes against normal nature. Is just comply blindly. At least you have some say, but hey, it is what it is. I mean, I think we're out of the water for now. It's on to the next one, and that's where we, like Matthew said, by again doing what you're doing with the Homestead and what Laney's doing, and showing people how to can food and do things that our grandparents used to do. That we need to get back to doing and get off of the dependence on the system. Listen, rarely are you going to be able to get completely out of the system, but the less dependent you become on it, the freer you actually become.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spent, a lot of the lockdown learning how to garden. Now I can garden. I've got, starts germinating here. I never knew how to do that before. I built a chicken coop in my backyard. I had 5 chickens. Now I've got 4. One of them got taken by a Cooper's hawk, which was just in the yard just a few hours ago. We had to chase it out because we let them kind of roam in the pen. And this thing has got eyes for our chickens now.
It's a buffet.
Yeah, man.
All you can eat chicken buffet.
You take all this low vibration bullshit, you just turn it around. You metabolize it, and it's like this sort of alchemical thing, and you just turn it into gold.
Right. Well, look at again 2020 as a whole. How many people started really good podcasts during that time? How many people used it to learn a skill? Like you started growing food. A lot of people did a lot of things that were previously either outside their comfort zone, or they just didn't think they had time to. But once they were told, do your duty and stay home, then they started trying to find things that actually brought them joy, as opposed to just being at work and back home.
Yeah.
Well, and people got away from the mindlessness of day-to-day life. I mean, you think about life pre-2020, and everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people were stuck in that mainstream mentality. You'd come home, turn on the TV, sit down, just mindlessly consume. And I think 2020 was kind of a wake-up call to people like, well, guys, do you really want to spend your life sitting in front of a box when there's so much more beautiful and exciting things out there? And I think it was an eye-opener to a lot of people. And I think it did push those who see the bigger picture back towards the natural way of life. And I think if we can swing that pendulum that way, that's how we kind of defeat the system in a way.
I'm 100% with you, Matt. That's the white pill that I have these days, is that I think more and more people are more conscious than they were for decades. I think that a lot of people, I think more and more people are willing to hear things that people like myself and you guys have to say. They'll just hear it, even if they're not 100% on board. They're willing to hear it. Whereas before they were shut off, they would say something to the effect, at least in their head, they would say, this doesn't matter. Leave me alone.
And I think we can credit
I can't
that
wait
with
for the game to start.
Yeah, I think we can credit that with the slow drip too, and the consistency of people like us just keep on putting content out. It doesn't matter if 5 people are listening to it or 100 people are listening to it. Just keep putting the message out there and try and gain some momentum and swing that pendulum yourself, at least in, again, your little world. And that's all we can really control is our direct world.
Yeah. And a lot of it is like, in the past too. And again, like, so I've spent years like as a leftist, and it's this constant, like in your head thing, and you're trying to win the debate on Facebook. So I got off Facebook 5 years ago, but, I was used to be in that mode where it's like trying to, sort of win the logic argument, and it's all up in the head. And then I really think now, like Chud, you mentioned like going into the store and like smiling to an old lady who's just, maybe afraid of whatever she doesn't even know, the invisible thing. And, but she sees you smiling, and just by that, it's like, you're the guy without the mask that's not going along with the program, but you're not doing it like rah, rah, with your fist in the hand. You're just doing it by not wearing a mask and keeping
grocery
a smile.
shopping.
And
Grocery shopping and
just
not
by
being
living your best life.
Yeah.
Right. And you're the guy that's smiling in a good mood, and you're not going along with the program and drinking the Kool-Aid. And that's what stands out. I think that's, as impactful as anything we could be doing.
Well, and even, outside of the last 3 years, the going along with the program and drinking the Kool-Aid has also included being more, at least where I have physically been in the last 10 years. It seems that we shut more and more people out, that we don't communicate with other people nearly as much. I told this on another podcast fairly recently, but that day I was getting ready to leave a parallel parking spot, and there was someone trying to back into the one in front of me, and they were having a real hard time, but I could see they had plenty of space. And I just rolled down my window and I motioned to them to keep coming, slow, stop. And then they pulled forward. I figured it was like a teenage girl who didn't know how to drive yet. Lo and behold, a 75-year-old or so man got out of that car, and he came right up to my window and he said, "Thank you so much. Do you know how long it has been since I've interacted with another driver that personally?" And I was just like, well, hey man, you're welcome, and, we shook hands through the window, and, he went off and did his thing. But it was like that blew that guy's mind, because he's older than me. He's familiar with an era where nobody would ever let someone struggle parking a car without giving them a hand. And, I just did it, not even really thinking. I wasn't trying to spread the positivity, but it really kind of sat with me afterwards. And I was like, wow, that was a really positive interaction. And we should, I should, and so should everyone else, just try to have those positive interactions everywhere they go, because seriously, that is what will raise the consciousness and the vibrations and bring us into a higher minded space as a whole of society. And that's when we can actually destroy the lies and the deceptions that are all being we're bombarded with them constantly.
Yeah. And that's the common thread, I think. When we talk about, well, there's urban fires and there's undergrounds under these cities and our history is bullshit. It's we're chipping away at the lies and deceptions. And some of them go back, 100, 200, 500, however many years. And then some of them are just, they're rolling out, 3 years ago. And you're like, this is horseshit. We know better. And if enough people, I don't know, maybe we'll live to see a watershed moment where there's a critical mass of people calling bullshit, or maybe we won't. And maybe there'll just be, enough of us that just go our own way. I've accepted too that, you're not going to save everybody. There's a lot of people that don't want it. A lot of people are comfortable living in the fear state, and that's what they're used to. And
I equate it to like your radio, right? The old school dial radio. And there's some people when you tune into them, hey, you're going to get the music you want to hear, right? And it's something you can kind of vibe with. But then there's other people, you get to their station and it's just static. And it doesn't matter how hard you try and adjust that dial to try and listen to them, you're just going to get static from them, and because your frequencies just do not connect, and that's okay. Yeah. And the fact that you don't have to fight with that person, just move on. There's another station. There's somebody else that's going to play some good music. Get away from the one that you don't connect with, because in the end, there's a lot of wasted time in just pointless arguments too. Frivolous stuff that just wastes not only time, energy, effort. You could be doing something totally different. It's like, just move on. It's okay to disagree. You might not ever get along with each other. Go your separate ways and be better off.
See, the key is, 100%. I like that analogy a lot there, Matt, but the key is realize when they're not hearing your frequency. Yep. Because chances are you recognize what their frequency is, and maybe you're just trying to change it a little by doing something. But if it's angering them, or even if it's just falling on deaf ears, you're wasting your breath and you're wasting your time. But if you're angering them, boy, just turn around. It probably doesn't matter. No. Whatever it is, unless we're talking about a life and death situation. But if you're talking about like what we podcast about and what we talk about, just turn around. I'm
with you, Chud, because even with the old world stuff, like I get a lot of people that are like, who gives a shit? I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fine. I'm like, it may not matter to you. And then I'm like, okay, I'm moving on. I'm not even going to waste time trying to explain to them why they should care about it, because obviously they don't. So why? What? I mean, and that's
they might tune into you someday, because someday they might start to realize in a totally different facet that has nothing to do with old world, that like the government's lying to them about something. And that starts them going, well, wait a sec, hold on. What else have I been being lied to? Wait, what was that? What was that guy Matt saying about the old world?
And that's one of the things, Chud. One of my first episodes I did was on the kind of the dark side of Disney, and that opened. I got a couple people that were like, "Man, I've never even considered that." And then listen to your podcast, and I went out and I did a little research on my own, and it was validated what you were saying, that it changed my opinion of something that I put in such high esteem and invested so much time and money into, to realize what it was really supporting. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, yeah, that does something, because that actually meant something to that person. That changed the way they and I didn't overbearingly push it on them. They willingly came and listened and found something out and went with it. And I think that's what we do, though. We're not going to connect with everybody. And there's a lot of people that think I waste a lot of my time doing stupid shit and looking at stupid stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm like,
cool.
But
I think you waste your time too. That's cool.
Yeah. But that's the same guy who's watching every NFL game on Sunday and just drinking beer every weekend. And it's like, okay, cool, man. That's what you do for fun. Great. Enjoy it.
And things like Disney or even NFL, like they're great examples of things that it's really hard to talk a lot of shit about Disney or the NFL or whatever somebody likes, especially if that brought them joy. For me, it was space. You couldn't fuck with space, man. I loved space. I was obsessed with it when I was a kid. I was obsessed with it past a point where I shouldn't have been anymore. And I got back into it when I was in my 20s and stuff. And then when I started questioning some of the things about space that were just a given to me, suddenly I could hear people who were criticizing NASA. But prior to that, I was like it was offensive to me.
Hey,
and
have you guys ever wondered why they push NASA and space and the dinosaurs so much on us when we're children?
Yeah.
And that some stay in that phase their whole life and some get out and realize, oh, wow, this is interesting.
It's wild. I have a 2-year-old. It's hard to find clothes for him that don't have dinosaurs or space on them.
Yep.
That's or degrading to the father.
Yep.
Head goes in this side, dad. Kind of stuff. That's all there is. It's either that or you've got to get plain clothes, and plain clothes are like hard to find almost. They want you to get the one with the picture of the dinosaur. They want you to get the one with the picture of space on it. Every gift for him from a grandparent has one of those two things on it, like across the board.
What do you think that is? Matt, what do you think that dinosaurs in space for children? What does that mean to you?
I think it's just programming. I think it's getting them into these ideas that, the more you look into them, the more suspect they have. They're part of this newfound story, right? Because dinosaurs weren't a thing in Egypt, right? They weren't talking about dinosaurs. They weren't finding skeletons. That didn't happen until the 1800s. And it's very interesting that around this time that everything is being written for this era, that we're finding dinosaurs. We're all of a sudden able to explore space. And it's also
if you question either of those two things, you're fucking stupid. Because scientists have already, it's not something to question.
Well, and along those lines, in the 1800s, a lot of schools were teaching a flat Earth model. And then all of a sudden it changed to the heliocentric model and the globe version. And that, again, it's why did we switch? Like, what? It's another factor where they can say, well, if you believe the old way, you're just being an idiot.
Well, here's what gets me about the dinosaurs, and a question for the scientists out there. Why do we know so much about what happened, during a mass extinction 65 million years ago, but what happened yesterday in geological terms, like 12,000 years ago, when the megafauna just vanished, from the face of the earth? We almost know nothing about that. And there's this like cognitive dissonance where it's like we can't even wrap our head around the fact that just the other day, geologically speaking, we had co-evolved for our entire existence with gigantic animals and plants.
Yep.
And now they're not here. And maybe we're still a little bit in shock over that. Right. And we make up these silly stories about how we hunted the mastodons to extinction. It's like, okay, did we also hunt the big-faced bears to extinction?
Right.
The saber-toothed tigers and the giant rhinoceros, sloths. And
ask yourself this too, Matthew. We know everything that happened 65 million years ago. We understand this, and we have a full understanding of what that was and what it was like. But yet we're having a real hard time figuring out what happened in Seattle less than 200 years ago.
Correct.
Most folks try and figure out when your house was built. You can probably do it, but it's not right there. And then figure out everyone who lived in there. Just the plot of land that you're living in. Like, just try and figure out the history of that, and chances are it's going to get convoluted very quickly.
Yeah. So gets back to the kids' pajama motifs, because it's storytelling. We tell ourselves, or we're told stories starting from a very early age. And the stories that we have in this modern age are stories that like comport and comply with, modernity and everything that goes with that.
And what else do space and dinosaurs do to us as humans as individuals, it makes us feel so small and insignificant, right? Because dinosaurs are these massive giant creatures, right? And we would never stand a chance against them. Space is just this amazingly open and infinite possibility, and we're just a speck on a rock that's floating through it.
Mm-hmm. And it spawns thoughts like I just had it said to me for the billionth time about a week ago. Isn't it pretty? I asked if they believed in aliens, and they said, well, it would be pretty arrogant for us to assume that out of the infinite space that exists, that we're the only ones that have intelligent brains. And it's like, okay, I wasn't starting the conversation, but if you believe that space is infinite, if you believe that we're that small, maybe we are the center of the universe. I'm just throwing it out there. What if we are? What if we are special? What if we're talking?
And the thing I've been thinking about lately, Chud, is what if we're talking about the same thing? What if they see aliens the way that we see multiple timelines, right? And they're talking about other universes with intelligent life, when in reality, it's just alternate timelines where, like we were talking about before, you make one decision, boom, you're on that timeline. You make this decision, you go on the other timeline. But all those timelines are all happening all at once. It's that everything has already happened before. Nothing new is being created. And I think that's a possibility. And I think, again, space is another way to disjoint us and create a divide there, when we may be talking about the exact same thing, just using different terms, and they believe it's up above our head, and we believe that it's in a realm sense, in a vibrational sense.
And that gets back to the radio frequency that you were talking about too, of that chances are they're not going to hear what we're talking about. I'll listen to anything anybody has to say about aliens. Trust me, I've listened to way too much. And I'm still into it. I still entertain those ideas, but I'm kind of on a different path right now, and I'm thinking about things from a different angle. And most people get straight up angry if you start questioning just how is space the way it is described? Like that question alone can make someone's head explode.
Let alone the moon landing. You really want to throw a grenade.
You went there.
Yeah, you just go in and go right to it. I mean, that's one way I start feeling people out too, is do they even question it? Yeah. Right. If they have no questions about the moon landing, they are 100% certain that it took place as we've been told, okay, fine. Then I know I can't talk to that person.
You can probably save your breath at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not just about space or the moon landing, but just about.
No, it's today in general. You can kind of generalize certain groups of people, unfortunately, by asking them one or two questions.
Yeah, you can. I mean, you can ask people what happened last week in terms of like the lockdowns, and hey, all this information is coming out that proved the conspiracy theorists right. And when they glaze over, that's the group they're in.
Ask them about Ukraine.
Them, yeah. It comes down to this, like, and there is a little bit of there is a grand bifurcation of society going on right now, where you have people that are comfortable just existing in this groupthink hive mind mentality. And it's not about reason and rationality and logic and any of that stuff. And it's not about how smart they are, what degree they have, or what, they're an expert in. It's about, are they comfortable in their own mind, like having their own, individuated thoughts, or does that scare them? And are they going to, run, like, reflexively run to where the programming sent them, into that, that sort of hive mind groupthink,
and are they going to get any resistance, right, Matthew? I think people are so afraid of getting resistance from other people at this point that, like, they'll be willing to just go with the flow. And rather than say something that might upset the herd, because the majority feels this way in their little area or their group that they're in, they'll just go with the group. And I think that's a slippery slope that we're in. And I think it has really divided into 2020 showed a lot of people that were willing to just step back and even question. And those are the people that I want to connect with, and I want to get out there, reach out to, because those are the people that can still, start to think independently and begin deprogramming or de-indoctrinating, because we've been bombarded our whole lives.
Defragmenting.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Guys, anything else we want to hit here real quick before we wrap it up?
We could go on all night, I'm sure.
Oh, of course. I'm just saying.
Yeah, this is just we're only 1 hour in, man. Isn't this like a 6-hour deal? No, I can't. No, we could go on forever, but we could wrap up anytime as well.
Well, let's talk again.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely, we can do that. Excellent.
I'd love to talk about megalithic architecture, because that's what got me into all of this. The whole thing with like world fairs and old world cities in America, that came much later for me. That was like, oh shit, like, the further back you go, the older things get. And like, why are like you started to say, Chud, like, why are like the deeper you go in the layers, like the more sophisticated and the more advanced, like in Ollantaytambo and Sacsayhuaman in Peru, like these megalithic sites where it's like it's the layers on the bottom, they're bigger, they're more sophisticated, they're impossible. It's like we can't wrap our head around how they even did this. We don't understand the technology, and those are at the bottom.
Yeah,
that was long ago.
Sacsayhuaman is a great example of it, because they'll tell you they know everything based on what it looks like up at the top, where there's a bunch of little tiny rocks that are just kind of stacked together, but they're on top of these 10-ton blocks that are all cut together so perfectly that they haven't fallen down for all of these years, and they're still tight. They're still airtight.
Yeah, it's super sophisticated, super advanced. So yeah, that stuff came for me before, and then I realized, wow, there's like an even greater mystery I feel in my own backyard. It's right here.
Yeah.
There's old world cities that you scratch the surface and it becomes inexplicable, and nobody seems to be aware of it.
I come from the same direction. I became convinced that we had an advanced civilization at least 10,000 years ago that built things like the pyramids and Sacsayhuaman and the H stones and all these other amazing things in our deep ancient history. And that was I chewed on that for like 10 years of there was nothing about ancient history that I wasn't interested in from a mainstream perspective or from an alternative perspective, but even the mainstream, because I was just dissecting it. Same as today. If anybody's talking about a World's Fair, I don't care what your perspective is. I want to see it, because I'm gonna find something in there. There's gonna be something good.
You guys can probably hear my dog is going nuts in the background. I think that might be my cue, fellas.
Hey, Matthew, before you head out, let everybody know where they can find you.
All right. Well, Marvelous Old World podcast on YouTube currently, and we'll see if I can get a Patreon account up and running here soon. And my architecture work is at dreamdesignbuild.org and on Instagram at Yurt Designs.
Hey, thanks again, buddy. It's always fun talking with you.
I love it, Matt. Thank you very much.
And Chud, where can everybody hear you?
They can hear me on the World as It Is Today podcast, where my wife Lanny and I discuss the family unit as it is in 2023 and how we got to where we are. From once upon a time we had the nuclear family, but we see that as a psyop, and that we actually come from what we call a generational farming history that got psyoped into being broken up into the nuclear family before becoming the broken homes that we're all living in today. It's fascinating stuff. But you can also still find me with Adam at Debra Gets Red Pilled. However, you're not going to find me on the Debra Gets Red Pilled feed anymore. You got to join his Patreon, because, I'm worth a lot of money. You got to pay money to see me back there. we're doing some pretty cool stuff. We're doing movie reviews, and we're kind of having some fun doing some roundtables, sort of all of what you do, Matt, with the Monday Night Master Debaters. And then on top of that, I also got to plug my wife Lanny's Greener Postures podcast, because that is just, it's doing really well. She's got a Patreon. She's doing workshops. She just wants everyone in the world to learn how to do what our recent ancestors knew how to do all over the place. These skills that were lost only in like the last 100 years, even 50 years. So
intentionally taken from us, you know.
Absolutely.
We've been programmed out of it because we've been taught we are the smartest and most advanced.
The first thing she's going to do is teach you how to grow botulism, because once you understand how to do that, you understand how not to do that. And that's the thing that everyone's afraid of. They say, oh, I can't can. I'm afraid I'll get my family sick. Chances are you're not, especially if you just know some really basic stuff.
Don't be a retard. Right.
Yeah,
that's the main thing, is just don't be an idiot. Like, hey, you may make a mistake here and there along the way. It happens, but don't just be, you know, think you know everything. That's when you get in trouble.
Absolutely.
Guys, thank you very much. This has been great. We will definitely do this again. You can find all my stuff at the Great Deception Podcast, whether it's Patreon, YouTube, Instagram. Thank you so much. Stay strong, question everything.
DC wars of the late 1800s with his arch nemesis Thomas Edison over which current to run through wires, newly powering cities and world fairs alike. Nikola Tesla was determined to demonstrate the capacity to transmit wireless electricity freely by way of his copper-coiled towers, connecting a circuit between heaven and earth, between sky and ground, drawing energy from the extant and omnipresent ether. The question I am raising is, did the ancients and ancestors know the secrets of the electric universe and weave into the fabric of their architecture, sacred and otherwise, this gnosis, rooted as it is in the teachings of the esoteric and alchemical, the principles of principles and sages? Did advanced old world buildings made of charge-producing piezoelectric stone, shaped into sacred, geometric, self-similar fractal forms, and gilded with charge-conducting precious metals on rooftops, domes, and spires, with their towers, peaks, bells, and organs still intact, vibrate with life, lifting the spirit and consciousness within its occupants, while projecting outwardly through cymatic portals of stone and prismatic leaded glass, itself a silica cousin of quartz, as sound waves rippling ever outward into the air, like light stirring up the ether, illuminating a path homeward to the divine. And if so, then we as spiritual beings having a physical experience belong to this architecture, imbued as it is within the boundless limits of natural law, perhaps even more than it belongs to us.